the epicenter for the homelessness crisis. But that also doesn't mean that we should shoulder the burden alone. And the fact that we have continued to push for other sites in other areas is around equity, but it also is a responsibility for us to address the hurt that's going on in our community. And we want to make sure that the voices of both the housed and unhoused residents of District 9 are heard. One of the things that we want to come out of this conversation is not only recommendations for solutions, but also recommendations for the City Council's budget priorities, because it is budget time, and the Councilwoman would like your input on what she should be focusing on and prioritizing for this district. So thank you all for joining us.
All right, thank you. Ryan, same question for you.
Sure, yeah. My name is Ryan Cox. I'm with Curtis Park Neighbors and chair of the Homelessness Solutions Committee. As far as what I'd like to see happen, from what I've been hearing, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what safe outdoor space is and what it looks like. And I think that I hope that we can talk more about what the model is and what it would look like and how it's different from what we see and experience now, and how I think it's an option to potentially address some of these acute issues that we face, and at the same time provide a path forward for folks that maybe don't have that right now. I will piggyback on what Lisa said, which is I think we do carry a disproportionate amount of the load, and that certainly contributes to the impacts that we feel. I think I know the focus of this is safe outdoor space. I would again, I echo Lisa that I would like to see us talk about sort of the systemic and the history of putting all of the service providers in this area, which has created an equitable situation, and talk about how we can change the model and how it will work better for not just our area, but for folks that are newly experiencing homelessness and maybe have those resources where they become homeless and in an area where they can get the most support.
Okay, I want to thank you all as panelists. I'm in the position of moderator this evening, and what that means is if you are on Zoom, if you're in Facebook, particularly if you're on Facebook right now, we want you to go ahead and share this out. If you're going to ask questions on Facebook, those questions I will only be able to see if it comes up on my particular page, and that is Jeff Farrar. But also the panelists, they may be looking at their computers as well, or their devices. If they've shared, you might be able to go ahead and answer questions that you're seeing coming up there. If you are watching via Zoom, I hope you're familiar with the chat or raising of the hands, etc. And we will do our best to get to as many questions as you have. Remember, we want to kind of keep our scope to what's happening in District 9 as it relates to this unhoused neighbor situation and the safe open space. I'd like to go first to Councilwoman Candy Cedabaka and ask the question. This was supposed to be an opportunity for the mayor to have the start of 3 community conversations. The mayor pulled out from that, I believe, with short notice, et cetera, after what I understand to be considerable planning. Can you tell us and give us an update in terms of why we continue to go ahead with this meeting, and then also some of the misunderstandings or truths around housing or allowing unhoused neighbors to be in the Blair Caldwell African American Library, Sonny Lawson Park area?
So let me start at the beginning. This is designated campsites are a concept that many cities across the country have talked about. Some are exploring. We've been encouraging our mayor to consider this concept for several years. He has been resistant to this concept since day one. We know that we can't build housing fast enough. We don't have enough affordable housing, and we barely have enough shelter space. So there's an in-between that has to happen. The situation became worse, obviously, with COVID and the need for social distancing. So there was a window of opportunity to pilot this model during COVID, while the CDC guidelines encouraged us not to shelter people in congregate spaces. It was activists in the community that really pushed the mayor to make a decision on this. There were council members in the background who had been advocating for this for quite a while. 8 council members wrote a letter to the mayor requesting that he support and authorize this model to exist. We cannot implement safe outdoor spaces without the executive branch allowing the zoning to accommodate safe outdoor spaces because of the camping ban and because of very specific zoning issues. And so after that letter from the 8 council members and extreme pressure from community members, the mayor relented and he said, okay, fine, you guys can have a safe outdoor space, but those 8 council members who wrote the letter, you figure out where it's going to go. Tell me where you think it should go. And so in District 9, we started a process of soliciting feedback of where to put it. And then we found out in the media before the deadline to submit our location recommendations that the mayor had selected the Coliseum. The Coliseum was a challenging place to, I guess, sell the idea of the first safe outdoor space, because we had just a month or 2 earlier put 2 shelters in that space. We put a women's shelter at the Coliseum and the men's across the street at National Western, putting 1,000 shelter beds into Glowville and Swansea, on top of all of the shelter beds that are already there, including the first tiny house pilot. And so neighbors were not happy about being left out of that. Council members also did not get input in that. That was a mayoral decision that kind of just was put out into the media before there was an opportunity to do community engagement. So that was scrapped. And then the mayor said, okay, fine, do some more community engagement, send us some more sites. So the CDC, what does that stand for, Therese? The Beloved Community Village Collaborative?
It's Colorado Village Collaborative.
Colorado Village Collaborative. They studied almost 100 sites in the city with an analysis of the zoning, the space. They raised all the funds to get the tents, to get the access to showers, trash, all of those things. It was independently funded, not city funded. They were waiting for a space. What we tried to do, because one of the biggest challenges in the beginning from community was that we were moving more unhoused people into an area where they weren't naturally at. So what people tried to do was acknowledge where campsites are currently at and figure out what is around those current campsites that would accommodate a safe outdoor space. So Blair Caldwell came up because there are current encampments all around Blair Caldwell. They're on the south side, they're on the north side, they're on the east side, they're on the west side. In fact, most of our sweeps happen within 1 or 2 blocks of Blair Caldwell Library. Blair Caldwell is going to be closed down for a year for renovations. And so this idea came up. It was not finalized. There had been a group of people in the Curtis Park neighborhood who had been working on investigating potential sites. We had pitched 2 other sites previously. This group worked intensively to create flyers, to do door knocking, to get their neighbors to attend these 3 stakeholder sessions that the mayor was going to host. Then on over the weekend, we found out again in the media that this was a finalized site when our community process had not been finalized and none of the meetings had been held yet. There was immediate backlash from wealthier and business interests within our 5 Points Business Improvement District. People who obviously had not been engaged in any of the previous research or outreach on it. And so they were frustrated and mounted an opposition campaign to this site. We got a call yesterday, right before we were about to have a meeting with the mayor's office about these town halls, and we were told that the site was scrapped, it was not appropriate, and that they would get back to us. And so that's where we are today. And I think we still have to figure out how to move forward. And we need to help community understand that this is a stopgap measure. Nobody believes that this is a solution to homelessness. All of us understand and recognize that the only solution to homelessness is housing, permanent, stable, affordable housing. But what are we going to do while we get there? So that's what we're here doing tonight.
All right, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot through several of these questions at once, and hopefully it will land within one of the panelists or someone's wheelhouse. It's not necessary for everyone to answer, or all of the questions, but that they will be bundled. And so I'm going to go with David M. And David wants to know, now that Blair Caldwell is out, if in fact that is the case, or if it was ever in, because it sounds like it might have been in question, or I don't know. Now that Blair Caldwell is out, what other locations are being considered in Curtis Park and also 5 Points? And Stephanie Lane wants to know what happened to the warehouse site on 44th and Colorado Boulevard. So let's just, those two look like they're coupled in terms of where and why. Anybody want to take a stab at one or both of those questions?
So we don't know what other locations are being considered by the mayor's office. The ball is in the mayor's court right now. We don't have authority as a community group or as city council to investigate and determine another site. Only the mayor has that authority, and we don't know what rubric he is using. We don't know what boxes are being checked off or what boxes there are to check off in their consideration. Almost 100 sites have already been studied by the Colorado Village Collaborative and their partners at Radian and the city of Denver. I have not heard of another potential site. We were initially looking for city-owned sites because that makes it easier. We had a private site that fell off that was removed. And so there's nothing that I know of right now that's currently on the table. Do any of you all, have you heard of any other sites that are being considered by?
And specifically, like, does anybody have any information on the warehouse on 44th and Colorado Boulevard?
So the information I have on sites, and we also have Cole Chandler who's in the audience. So if we can elevate him to talk about the sites, because it seems like a majority of the comments that are coming in are around the sites. In being part of that conversation, a lot of the other additional sites that were looked at had to do with basically in dumping areas where there are trash, landfills, close highways. So these are not places where we should be putting human beings. And so that's been part of the tension. The Colorado Village Collaborative put together an equity index to kind of weigh what some of those indicators would be of to where to put a site. So Cole, can you speak a little bit more to sites, what y'all looked at, and also those equity issues that you all considered?
Sure. So I'll just speak specifically, first of all, to the 44th and Colorado site. I'm actually not familiar with that location, so I don't believe that that has been looked at to my knowledge. We've been going through this process for a number of months, all the way back to March, when, as Councilwoman Baca outlined, it started as a community-based initiative. We've been looking through or at sites from a number of different criteria. We're looking at the size of the site, the zoning accommodations of the site, its proximity to services. We're looking to know what kind of utilities and infrastructure it might have access to. We're looking to know how, what the demographics are of the neighborhood that surround the site and how those play into the site. And so these sort of criteria, among a number of others, are all being considered each time that we look at a site. One of the criteria that's most important is that there's a willing landowner. Ultimately, we can't make a site happen if there's not a willing landowner. And so, different people have suggested different sites at different times, but when those sites are privately owned and we don't have access to them, they aren't possible at all. And so, we've just been going through a process of identifying potential vacant sites, figuring out if they meet some of the basic criteria, trying to understand how they would impact the surrounding neighborhood, and determining whether or not they might be able to move forward.
Okay, I want to go over to Ryan for just a second. Ryan is a part of, the Curtis Park neighbors. Ryan, how involved, and I know it is very involved, Curtis Park neighbors has been looking at this issue for, as long as I can remember, going all the way back to the Triangle and, even forecasting what's happening right now. I would say as many as 15, 20 years ago. Ryan, where does Curtis Park neighbors stand in terms of the process, even Blair Caldwell or Sonny Lawson even being considered as a spot? Can you just give us a background on the neighbors' point of view from Curtis Park?
Sure. Yeah. Going back, we just due to our location, we are sort of in the eye of the storm. So we've been, dealing with this issue and trying to find solutions for quite some time. I've said in meetings with Cole going back a couple years, just when the concept or idea of a safe outdoor space was first being, discussed. And, I think as we've worked with encampments in the neighborhood and see the dynamics involved, particularly in light of COVID and the challenges that brings, especially how it impacts the shelter system and options for folks. As a concept, I think it makes a lot of sense. It gives people the opportunity to stabilize and not be moved from block to block. For me, it's a better option for unhoused folks, and it can create a space where people are not in residential or business right-of-ways that and which would lessen the impact on the neighborhood and neighbors. So we wrote a letter in support of the concept of safe outdoor space and submitted that to the mayor early on. We were also involved in sort of the first round of identifying or trying to identify potential sites. We don't have any authority obviously to make it happen, but we did try to come up with ideas for spaces that would make sense. The site at you asked specifically about the site at Blair Caldwell or near there. That did come from the suggestion was initially the parking lot that is on the north side of the library. Like Candy said, the library is going to be closed for my understanding was for the duration of COVID, and they're working on a renovation as well. That parking lot is not being utilized or being underutilized. So that was the initial suggestion as a possibility. It proved to not be possible. And I think from, as Cole said, that, they have technical and regulatory and feasibility studies that they do on the sites, and it shifted from there to the potential of being at 24th on the street and the plaza. That wasn't the site suggested. I can understand the challenges that they ran into and looking for alternatives. So yeah, that's sort of the background as far as how that came to be.
Just real quick, and I want to go to Therese, and I'm going to hit a couple of other questions as it relates to Blair Caldwell. Info Trinity says, wasn't the SOS plan at Blair Caldwell short term? And how does that impair development plans? And Dwayne Arthur says, can we put the tent city in another district since we have so many shelters and services in District 9 already? Why do we have to have another tent city in D9? And with that said, there is a caveat that has been running through in terms of, shouldn't every district have an SOS, burden or zone? And, you already talked about the impact that unhoused neighbors carries in District 9. So what is the responsibility for other districts? And then also the short-term element, and we've already got a lot of tents. Why does there need to be another, why does District 9 have to perhaps be the start of this in terms of how it would work or not? And I'll shoot that out to anyone.
I just want to start with the short-term nature of the SOS concept. So the whole point of piloting the SOS concept right now during COVID was because it would only be temporary during COVID, during the emergency orders. No SOS anywhere was going to go beyond the emergency COVID orders. There was, in fact, something written into the agreement. Cole, remind me, was it that they would have to be dismantled 20 days after the emergency orders were lifted?
21, yeah, 3 weeks.
21 days after the emergency orders are lifted. So yes, it was absolutely supposed to be short term. For Donnell's question about putting another tent district or tent city in our district, nobody was trying to add another anything. The point was to consolidate and mitigate the existing camps that are already there. Camping is the status quo in our district. We don't get to just pluck up a tent and move it somewhere else. What we were trying to do was deal with the impacts of the current camps in a way that provided services and mitigated the issues that neighbors complain about.
Councilwoman, just to follow up, and then Teresa, I want to I've got a direct question for you, and then would like to hear your take on any of this. Nadia would like to know, Councilwoman, were you aware of and in support of using this space as a designated campsite? Were you aware? And then also, were you in support of?
So we were in support of the concept the entire time. We have been trying to help facilitate the outreach to neighborhoods, the planning for that, the identification of sites, and working with landowners. We have tried to be supportive in any and every possible way. We had no authority to determine that this was going to be the location. We were supportive of it anywhere that we could get it, and we wanted to make it possible in any neighborhood where there was available space. This made the most sense because there's already camping there. There are already tents there, and we were trying to address the current situation.
Therese, in your opening statement, you made a comment, residents of Sunny Lawson Park, residents of Sunny Lawson Park. And I would like for you to kind of address that statement, particularly in light of Evan P's comment that the people of Denver voted Initiative 300 down by almost 85%. And so with that being said, with the residents of Sonny Lawson Park. How do you jive those two dynamics?
Yeah, so I'm going to say that because there are literally, 50, 100 people that live in the surrounding they're called to a library in the park area near the church and right in that specific spot. Some of these people have been surviving there, I should say, for upwards of a couple of years or more, many years, some shorter. Many of the residents of that park are people who are literally from Five Points, who were displaced from Five Points and landed on the street homeless and are staying in that very area. There was a woman I was speaking with just today in the park who grew up right in the area, went to school with Hancock, actually, and had many words to say to him, but unfortunately she's not here to share her words, and is again now living on the streets in that park, trying to connect to resources. She just got out of jail. She's trying to get into rehab programs and really struggling. But she's somebody who is from Five Points. So I mean, that's the kind of people that we're talking about here, is folks who have been living in that area for long periods of time or short, but who gather there because it's the place, it's the safest place they can find. People aren't gathering there because they want to be living on the streets. They're gathering there because they need somewhere, and there's a community there that can look after each other. So I guess in terms of like this broader question of support for quote unquote camping, which is really surviving. Camping is not the appropriate term for it. And the reality of residents in the park, it's not, when it comes to folks who are living on the streets, this question of whether we move forward, how we move forward, are we going to have SOS sites, which sites, all of these questions ultimately boil down to a lack of choice. So for folks that are in these situations, for folks that are living in this park, it's not a matter of, are we going to move forward? You have to move forward. They're going to continue to live on the streets in a tent, either in that park or down the block or somewhere else, unless we have options available. And so, I guess, I don't know if I'm answering this question properly, but
well, I think you are. I want you to, because you, in your opening comments, you mentioned that you want you want people to face reality, and Benjamin Dunning makes this statement: people will continue to be at Blair Caldwell regardless of if it's sanctioned or not. Folks have been using that space for decades, so we should not expect people will suddenly not be there just because the mayor has changed his mind. Is that some of the reality that should be faced, or that you're talking about, Therese?
Exactly. If we want to pretend like not sanctioning an SOS site there is going to mean that the folks that are living in the area are going to disappear, then we're living in a false reality. We need to face the reality that that's where people are living. They're from this community. They need somewhere to be. And we need to provide the supports and the steps necessary so people have an opportunity, an option to be somewhere that's better. And when folks in the park found out about this possible sanctioned site and possible additional supports with showers and food and so on that was going to be there, I got overall a very wide support when talking with residents about that. And today, when talking with residents about that at our meeting, there was a number of folks that just were in tears, literally, and up in arms, because now they're like, okay, well, now we're going to get swept. Now where are we going to go? We thought we had this stability coming, and it's getting taken away from us. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the sentiments that we're hearing from folks that are staying in that area.
We've got a
I just
couple.
want to follow up with that, Brother Jeff, and address the issue of 300. What's the difference between 300 and this? 300, and not to debate the merits of it, but the concern and the fear was you can camp anywhere. And the idea was to not criminalize that behavior. The reality is today is people are still camping where they can find a space that they feel is safe themselves, versus the safe outdoor space concept. And I want to kick it to Cole after this, because there was a question about what exactly is it, and that is a managed site. It's a 24/7 site, and so that is very different. In terms of what kind of staffing. So I'll let Cole speak to that. But I also want to point to a citywide survey that was done of over 600 folks in terms of their perception of SOS sites. And 8 out of 10 supported temporary safe outdoor spaces. And that included folks who were opposed to 300. And what changed their minds was the pandemic and the increased homelessness and housing crisis, and just people facing eviction. So I think we saw that people's empathy went up after everyone saw the economic, housing, and pandemic crises that we were in. The other results of that report for the SOS sites were strong across all sectors. So almost 80% of business owners supported this concept. Over 80% of people who are active in RNOs were supportive. Those who identified as Latino, about 74% were supported. Black and African American, about 82% supported the concept. 78% of people who worshiped, and 84%, almost 85% of people who worked in Denver. And then, we had tended to have folks 45 and older also very supportive, as well as younger people. So, there's a disconnect between people supporting the concept and then people not wanting it by them. And so if I can ask Cole, you've heard that feedback, and this concept was to mitigate those concerns that community had in this citywide survey, and also the ton of outreach that you all have done around this concept.
And Cole, as you get ready to answer and chime in on that, I want to throw a couple of more questions your way that you might be able to answer as a part of your response. And speaking to Benjamin Dunning's comment about, people have always been in that area around Blair Caldwell. Leanne Wheeler says she led ministry there just 20 years ago, and they were serving people in, sunny Lawson Park. So what you're seeing is not new. And as mentioned, that area has always served as a place where community, use that space. I want to go, Cole, I want you to think about these two Facebook comments. One, and this might go into the ideas area that Candy had mentioned. Stephen Douglas says, can you change the outcome of the property near the stock show to make that public housing for the homeless? And then also, Michelle Sylvian says the stock show property has been mentioned several times. What happened? Cole.
All right. Well, thank you. So I think that Councilwoman Seda Baca has said it best when she said that camping is the status quo. There's camping all around Denver right now. We all know what that looks like. We know what it feels like. And we see it on a daily basis. So when this pandemic started, our organization put our ear to the ground to understand where were the gaps within the COVID homeless response. And so we talked with people on the streets, we talked with advocates, we talked with service providers, we talked with council members, and we talked with neighborhoods. And what we heard over and over again was that unsheltered neighbors were falling through the cracks of the system, and it was causing great concern for everybody all across our city. And so we devised this model with several partners as an attempt to try to bring some order in the midst of the situation. And so what a safe outdoor space is it's a temporary managed campsite. And so when I talk about this, I always invite people to, imagine what we see on a daily basis, which is the status quo that are campsites all around our city. So we all have that image of what that is in our mind. And some of us have a more positive image and some of us have a more negative image, but we can see what that looks like. When we talk about a safe outdoor space, we're talking about something different. Instead of tents just being right next to one another, we're talking about tents being spaced apart, ideally 12 feet apart to accommodate for the CDC guidelines around encampments during the pandemic, so that people have adequate access to social distance and to stay safe and separated from one another. Instead of seeing, a lot of storage taking place outside of a tent and sometimes trash piling up because there's not adequate resources, we're talking about providing storage to residents. We're talking about providing trash that would be emptied on a daily basis. We're also talking about bringing bathrooms to these facilities, so people aren't having to go in the alleyways or go in places because we don't have adequate access to public bathrooms. So we're bringing all of those resources on site. We're also talking about a site that has a fence that surrounds it, that has a single point of entry and exit that's managed by staff 24 hours a day. And so we all have this image of what a baseline status quo campsite is. What we're talking about is something that's a bit different in environment. And so when we think about the potential to have had in a safe outdoor space near the Sunny Lawson Park, we know camping's happening there right now. This was a proposal to try and apply a harm reduction approach to what's happening there, to make it safe for everybody that's living in the campsite, resource rich for everybody that's living there. As Therese said, the bathrooms, the showers, the food, all those kinds of things that we were going to deliver. And also to make it something that is manageable and approachable for neighbors as well. And so that's kind of what this concept is and what that looks like. As to the question about the stock show, I want to clarify that the previous location we were looking at wasn't actually the stock show side, it was the Coliseum side. So we're looking at the parking lot. We entered into conversation with folks in the Globeville neighborhood, and throughout that process, we just realized that that was not the right way to go at this time for many of the reasons that Councilwoman Tejabaka elaborated on.
Just quickly to anyone that can answer this, because there seems to be several questions on Facebook, and I'm seeing some that have come up on the Zoom link as well, and it talks about the churches and the faith community, and the churches having parking lots, etc. Have you, in your search or your quest, have you looked at some of the opportunities to partner with the faith community? And I imagine that Stephen is a pastor because it says Stephen Pastor, but it could be Pastor Stephen, I'm not sure. Says, I've only heard mostly lies. Candy only wants this in the 5 Points residential area. No camping should be in any residential area out of here. So talk about what you've been hearing from the faith communities and the partnering and perhaps sharing of resources. And anyone can kind of.
I'll take a start at that. So the faith community was one of the first places that we turned to when we started looking into this. And actually our very first proposals that we presented to the mayor's office back in April, we brought forward sites that we had talked with faith communities, and faith communities were willing to offer their sites. Both of those sites were thwarted because of zoning regulations. So this gets a little bit technical, but our city is governed by a zoning code, and the practices that gave rise to the zoning code are worth looking into from a racial equity lens for sure. But the reality is that we are governed by this zoning code. About 80% of the city was updated into a new zoning code in 2010, and that's called the Denver zoning code. But about 20% of the city remains under an old code called the former Chapter 59 zoning code. And one of the burdens that we've run into is that the old code does not give the zoning administrator the authority to declare temporary unlisted uses. And it turns out that lots of our churches and our faith communities around the city are in this old code. So both of those first sites that we brought forward back in April were in that old code. So they were deemed not viable early on. Actually, just this week, a bill went to the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee and City Council to give the zoning administrator authority over former Chapter 59 zoning as well. So that's a positive thing that is going through a council process right now that could make more faith communities available. But the reality is that not every faith community has entered into this conversation in a deep way. And I come into this work as a person of faith. I'm actually a minister by training, and that's what led me into the work that I do. I previously lived right across the street from the Blair Caldwell Library and the Sonny Lawson Park when that was the Denver Catholic Worker House before it burned down at 2420 Welton Street. But the reality is that, you know, not all people of faith have gone into this issue in a deep way. And so for some faith communities, we're starting at a place where they can really see the need to offer space in this way. But for other faith communities, that is a bit more challenging. We would love to continue having those conversations with faith communities, especially as more land becomes available through the code.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Therese a question, and then I'm going to go through about 4, maybe 5 of the questions that are in the chat, and then I'll go back and look at Facebook as well. Therese, there seemed to be a buzz in the community about, you know, the possibility of some safe open space. When we see the sweeps there, to me, it seems to be a level of terror that's attached to that, particularly when you are rounding individuals up out of rapid eye movement sleep at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. What is the sense, what is the feel in the unhoused neighbor community with the individuals that you interact with in terms of their expectation and perhaps some of the frustration that you're hearing? What's the climate like?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is terror. It's a lot of terror. It's a lot of distress. It's a lot of hopelessness. Folks are there was some time, so right after COVID started until fairly recently, where there was a bit more stability. The city didn't entirely back off of sweeps, but largely did, because there's a CDC guidance which says that you should not be sweeping encampments during COVID and instead should be providing sanitation resources. The city has never followed that CDC guidance, but there was a sort of brief pause that enabled folks to have more stability. And in addition to that, more and more folks were landing on the streets due to the economic effects of COVID. So yeah, the increase in sweeps that's kicked up in the past couple of months has really put people in a state of distress as they are constantly getting moved from a spot, moving to another spot, and then again facing a sweep to get moved to another spot, to get moved to another spot, to get moved to another spot. And by get moved to, that's probably a misnomer. It's more moved to, because the city never, ever points to another spot and says, here, you can't be here, but you can be over here. You can't be here, but you can be over there. No, they never do that. The only answer that the city is giving people is to go to a shelter. A shelter is not a safe environment or a viable environment for a whole bunch of reasons. I could go on and on about that in terms of space, in terms of COVID, in terms of safety, in terms of location, on and on. So yeah, really, like, this is a hard time for folks. People in our meeting today were really expressing just how hard it is with everything being closed due to COVID, and with the instability of not knowing when they're going to be swept, especially to the residents of this Sonny Lawson Park area. We're all hopeful that this SOS would be in place, and they would have some hope at stability. And now all of that is gone, and so they're completely
hopeless of where they're going to go. Same thing with a camp over at 25th and Arapahoe. They're next to a school. They understand it might not be the best location when the school starts in person, but they're not being told, well, you can't be here, but here's another option. And so, yeah, I mean, just imagine that. Just put yourself, if you haven't been in those shoes yourself, if you haven't lived on the streets in that situation yourself, just put yourself in those shoes for a moment and think about, what are you going to do when you're at a moment's notice told you have to move all of your life, and are constantly in that sort of instability. So I could go on and on, but
that definitely gets to the heart of the questions that I asked. Panelists, what I'd like to do is I'm going to read about 4 or 5 in a row, and if there's any that speak out to you, I'd like for you to address them. Liza Jones, as we're talking about faith, says, what happened to the Interfaith Hospitality Network that used to house homeless overnight? Catherine Weathers says, has anyone ever explored the option of lockers? This is used in Europe. It might provide some relief and might be easy to implement in the interim, not a long-term solution. Rick says, what other districts are working on providing for the homeless? Why only Denver districts having to shoulder the burden? What about Lakewood, Arvada, and Aurora? And then also I want to go to Ben's comment or question here. Does the city, this is a question, does the city own any other vacant lots that are a reasonable distance from residences that are in the city center near existing informal sites? Can you be more specific about which interests objected? 5 Points, Biz, Rhinos, etc. So I'm going to stop right there and let anyone tackle any of those questions that I just posed.
Can I do some delegation? Because Cole has been part of multiple efforts to find city-owned land, both for the tiny home village and for this site. So Cole, if you could speak to the question about, are there any city-owned parcels that are possible? And Therese, can you speak a little bit about the locker question after Cole finishes?
And then also, Cole, we want to throw in, what about the Park Hill Golf Course?
All right. So yes, there are city-owned parcels that are available, and we're looking into those and trying to evaluate those. And I shouldn't just say that we are. The city departments are looking into those. So I'm not just speaking for CVC. One thing that has been stated is that the desire is to have multiple safe outdoor spaces. So I've seen on here that we need up to 50 safe outdoor spaces. That's absolutely true. The mayor's office has said that they would support up to 3 during this pandemic. And so what we've been talking about all along is not a either or situation. It's if we can get a site, we want to make that site work, and we want to make additional sites work as well. So there are city-owned sites that continue to be evaluated, and more that come to the table all the time for further consideration.
Not just in District 9.
Absolutely not. No. And so one of our big priorities has been to try to find the areas where people are camping and try to do sites near those. So we know there's lots of encampments in District 9. There's lots of encampments in District 10, and there's lots of encampments throughout the city. And so absolutely not just in District 9. We're looking all over the city. We've had conversations. I have had sit-down conversations with council members in District 3 and District 7 and District 10 about sites in their communities, and we continue to progress those conversations.
But before you go on, Cole, I'm gonna keep throwing in stuff that's relevant to what you're talking about as well, and I want to piggyback on what Therese said. She mentioned that folks are told to move from one place, but not told to where they can go. And so if there are concentrated areas, wouldn't that kind of information about where you can go kind of alleviate some of the burden around where people are just because there is no place to go. And Elette Valentine says, what happened to the convention center that the millions of dollars was spent to build for COVID, i.e. overflow health centers? Why can't our unhoused neighbors be housed there if it is temporary and Colorado has such low numbers? There is a likelihood there would be thousands of infected COVID patients.
That's actually a really interesting question, because before National Western and the Coliseum became the congregate shelters during COVID, we proposed, our office proposed the convention center, and somehow the state swooped in and scooped that up for the hospital, the temporary hospital that has not even been utilized. And so they basically have dibs on it and a contract on it with the city now through, I think it's the end of the year, just holding it in case we need it as a hospital. It's absolutely something that I've brought up multiple times and have just keep getting the same answer. It's an overflow hospital. We're holding it for the overflow hospital.
You know, if this is like, it is an emergency and it is an epidemic, I think Liza, and when you're starting to talk about ideas, and then we'll get to you, Teresa, about those lockers, FEMA camps should be set up. You know, we see in this midst of tragedy, they set up housing and, you know, temporary shelter all the time. Liza says FEMA camps should be set up to house these people, especially so our local government can be building more affordable, attainable housing. What are your thoughts, anybody?
I would just say that that's exactly how we've framed the situation in our talks with various folks. Is it is a humanitarian crisis, and maybe it's localized to primarily our district, I think District 10, so it's not felt throughout the city. But that is what we're facing, and it's not being addressed as if that's what it is. And that's what we need to work towards is solutions. Some of them are like the Safe Outdoor Space. I don't think anyone here has any delusions that it's going to solve homelessness, but it provides a bridge, a stopgap to a serious humanitarian crisis that we're dealing with right now. And that's, I think, what people. We have to come to that reality that that's where we are at, and things are not trending in a positive direction as we see it. So, yeah, I think we need to get more serious about approaching it as if it is a crisis.
Well, Sarah Rose says, but will safe outdoor spaces include safety from cop presence and searches, i.e. warrants? And of course, these people shouldn't be expected to be sober. I think that the question tapers off there, but again, the relationship between safe outdoor spaces and the police. We do know that there can be a little or a lot of tension as that's regarded. Therese, can you speak to that, and can you talk about the lockers? And then what was the 5 Points Bids position as it relates to this discussion and also the RNOs? Therese?
And Brother Jeff, just a quick interjection. So after Therese goes, I can take the 5 Points Bid question quickly. And then we have a time, we have to start winding down. Candy has to be at another event. And I also want to leave time for maybe closing thoughts around solutions, because I've seen a lot of comments about folks wanting to know what can they do.
Okay, Therese.
I'll just try to speak briefly on this. Police are not allowed to enter people's homes whenever they want. There's basic rights we have. It should be the same thing for folks who don't have the ability to afford housing and have to live in a tent. So we want that same sort of respect for our communities who are living at these safe outdoor spaces as anybody who lives in a home, that you cannot just be intruded by police, and that police are not the solution to a lot of the problems that they have been tasked with treating as their job. So let's rethink policing. use these safe outdoor spaces and other places as an opportunity to do that, to treat safety concerns as real safety concerns, not as policing concerns. This is a real opportunity to do that in a way that will be much safer and better for folks, instead of having that constant expectation that police can show up at your tent door at any time and intrude your privacy and so on.
Anything about the lockers? Anything about the lockers?
The lockers. So we, as Denver Homeless Out Loud, have had a locker project going for a while now, where we attempted to put up lockers across the city. Long story short, we have run into endless zoning barriers, similar to the issue we're facing here with the safe outdoor space or with the tiny home. The minute you try to do something that's a little different, you run into zoning issues. So as crazy as it sounds, that was one of the major barriers. Still hoping to make that possible and be able to put lockers that are secured to the ground out for folks on the street.
Well, I want to give everybody an opportunity to make a closing statement. And then, of course, Dr. Lisa Calderon, you can, in your statement, talk a little bit about, the resistance or support question. And as folks are wrapping up with their closing remarks, you might want to take a stab at any question that you see that is in the feed. Those of you who have made questions within the Facebook world, the Councilwoman staff will be going through those and then vetting those and perhaps even getting back to you. I'm not sure after we close the Zoom what happens to the questions in the chat. I don't know if those are captured or not. But with that being said, I want to move to closing statements, and particularly with if you've seen or heard of any solutions. Let's start with Cole, and appreciate your participation.
Sure. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate being a part of this conversation. I think just in terms of closing statements for me, I would just say that for us, back in March when we started this conversation, we started with a sense of urgency. We're in the midst of a pandemic. People are hurting, and we need to do something. People need a space to stay safer at home. They don't have that. And it seems like in the midst of all this, trying to choose the perfect site, trying to think about how to engage the community in a perfect way and make it work for everybody, we've really lost that sense of urgency. And I really want to bring that back for us. People are out on the streets every single day. It's a humanitarian crisis, as we said. And so how do we respond to that effectively as a city? I think that's the question that we have in front of us. What do we need to do to take care of our neighbors tonight and tomorrow night and on and on? So thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Cole. Let's go over to Therese. Do you have closing thoughts? And then as you make your closing thought, can you think about this question from Katrina Wirt? Is anyone exploring private community-driven funding to support the SOS launch? Also, is this already happening? They would like to know more about, the funding, matching dollars, and leveraging points as it relates to the city. So, Therese, your closing thought, and then also what kind of partnerships are you seeing that are taking place?
So Cole would really be better to answer that funding question. I can't speak to that very well. I don't know if you want to give him a second to do that. Or
you'll take a shot at that in terms of partnerships, leveraging partnerships, business, community-driven funding, et cetera.
So we have a GoFundMe account that is providing some basic funding for things like tents and things like that. I'll throw that in the chat. That's an easy way for community to get involved and provide some small level funding. Another thing that went through committee yesterday, through the FinGov Committee of City Council, was a funding package that would include about $450,000 for safe outdoor spaces, if we can get one set up. That money is designated to provide funding for safe outdoor space number 2 and number 3. As we mentioned, safe outdoor space number 1 is essentially funded by community-based funding. But that $450K, basically the idea is that the city would pay for the second safe outdoor space, and then the city would put up half the funds for the third, and we would try to leverage those to get matching dollars. And so all I can do for that right now is just say to pay attention to that. If you have interest in thinking creatively about how to leverage those funds, please reach out to me or to the District 9 Council office, and maybe we could get a follow-up group to kind of think in those ways. But yeah, that's some of the information there.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. Therese, your closing comment, and then Rick has a direct question to you. And that question is, why do the homeless choose not to relocate when provided an option for a physical location? Will only an SOS location be needed for those individuals that do not want to relocate from the street? What is the long-term option for tent homeless? Therese, your closing comment, and with that question in mind, thank you for your participation.
Yeah, so homelessness was not caused by homeless individuals. It's caused by a system in our society whereby housing has not been made attainable for folks. By and large, and I mean by and large, from all surveys, from housing wait lists, from all evidence, a large majority, roughly 90% or more of people who are homeless do not want to be homeless. They want to live in housing, but that housing is not attainable. So in terms of when people are living in tents and they are given an option, I'm yet to be aware of situations where folks are pointed to another option other than a shelter. Shelters are not a viable housing option for a whole bunch of people for a whole bunch of reasons, as I spoke to before. So if the question is regards to why people don't go to shelter when they're told to go to shelter, that can be because of being with a partner, not wanting to be separated from, having a pet. The hours that the shelter is open, the rules or some of the expectations of the shelter that don't work for certain people, the closed environments, on and on and on. So that's not an option for a lot of people. And pointing to another option, people who are living in tents who are told, here is another block you can move to, or here's another site that works. By and large, do that. And if you're not pointed to another option, then what's the point in moving, really? So I don't know if that answers that question, but really just to wrap it up, it's folks don't want to be homeless. You're living in tents because you have to, and you need viable options that work for you as an individual, not treating you as a criminal that has to be warehoused in a shelter, much like a jail.
All right, thank you, Therese. Ryan, I would like to hear your closing comments, and would you talk a little bit about this question regarding other RNOs? We heard the involvement of the Curtis Park neighbors. What are you hearing in terms of other neighborhood associations, and do you participate like in the inter-neighborhoodal, there's like an inter-neighborhood kind of coalition, et cetera? Thank you for participating, Ryan, and then also speak to the broader efforts of RNOs.
Sure, yeah. So Curtis Park Neighbors does participate, is involved in INC, which is that inter-neighborhood cooperative that you're talking about. I don't know that I can speak to their position or involvement or RNOs generally. Again, I think we're probably uniquely oriented. Again, a lot to do with geography, and have been working on these issues for some time. So for RNOs, I think it would be great to engage with other RNOs, especially in areas where homeless folks are living. I do think these SOS sites, and I understand when I look at the comments, I understand this desire for them to be somewhere else, but particularly for these areas that are impacted, I think it really should be viewed as an opportunity to improve the situation for both the unhoused and housed folks. And I hope that with Cole's explanation and hearing more about the concept, that people can hear that's really the design, is to improve the situation, not just add more homeless to your area. The last thing I wanted to say is just in sort of wrapping up is, Teresa and I don't always agree on everything, but I certainly agree with her that shelters don't work for everyone. And I think the number of folks on the street is evidence that we need to be looking at different options for folks, and the system isn't working particularly well. If it were working well, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I think we need to be looking at different types of options. I think SOS are one of those. I think there are other things that should be explored and should be looked at more closely, and finding ways that address people's needs where they are. Again, going back to the geography, the reality is that most of the permanent services are located in this area. Becoming homeless essentially anywhere else in the metro area, or in most of the rest of Colorado for that matter, this is where you come to get services. That needs to change to where people can get those services where they are. They're most likely to be able to move forward in their life if they're getting services where they are. So I'll finish with that.
I appreciate your participation, Ryan. I want to go to Dr. Lisa Calderon for closing remarks, and then also support, resistance, etc.
The Downtown Denver Partnership runs the 5 Points Business Improvement District, and the people on the 5 Points bid are appointees of the mayor. The Downtown Denver Partnership also were the architects of the legislation for the camping ban. So when we have an entity that says and promise we can do better, but is resisting and pushing back on these efforts, that's part of the problem here. But having said that, there are also people on the 5 Points bid who want to do the right thing. And, for people who say that there was no outreach to businesses or to them, they need to look at their website for their minutes and see that the mayor's deputy chief of staff actually was working with them as well. So I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to now rethink about how do we come together and move a concept like this forward. I'm going to Maggie's question about, how do house neighbors in 5 Points support this concept? And then also tying in Matthew's question about, but if we do it here, does it basically lead to letting off other districts? And what it is it's both and. We need to make sure that the oppositional voices aren't the loudest voices. I am really, heartened by so many of the comments in the chat and on Facebook really are about people curious about this concept and wanting to move it forward. So I'm really glad that we move forward with this town hall. We are going to do our best to work with CDC and Interfaith Alliance to get your questions answered and to get those posted, because it to me, there's hope in that people are authentically curious about how do we move this forward and do the right thing for everybody in District 9, housed and unhoused alike. So thank you all for joining us. And the councilwoman is actually talking to an RNO right now, which is why she's not able to give closing comments.
Well, thank you, all of you, for your participation. Haroon Collins says supporting that concept is different than the community isn't involved, is different when the community isn't involved in the process. Where was the formal outreach? I would like to see a flyer of outreach previous to this week. You want to talk a little bit about outreach, Dr. Calderon?
Yeah, let me just say that, as a community organizer, as my baseline, you can never do enough community outreach. So we are fully in support of more and more and more. This week of meetings was supposed to be that kickoff of those conversations. And again, let me reiterate this, there was no site that was finalized. There have been almost 100 sites that have been looked at and analyzed. And so bringing the community in has been going on, I know, through our office for at least the past 4 months. So to say that there has been no community outreach is absolutely inaccurate. And this is also another layer on that. And we hope to be able to have more of these conversations because we want the concept to be shaped, but not to slow down. As Cole had said, there's an urgency around this. And so we need to not keep putting layers and layers of bureaucracy on this because it will literally cost people their lives. And just the last thing, Elena Alvarez with Colorado Politics asked the questions about kind of what's the point if winter is coming and should we still have tents? And Cole can speak to this better than I can, but people will be out there anyway. And so are we going to do it in a way, in a harm reduction type of manner where we can check on people? But Cole, just in terms of the logistics of that, can you just take that question quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that people are living in tents 365 nights a year in Denver, and we're trying to apply a harm reduction approach. Specifically, what we would be doing with folks that are staying in tents is that we would be working with them to find out what kind of cold weather gear they need, hand warmers, heat blankets, various things like that, just at a base level. We would also be, providing some warming tents that have propane heaters that wouldn't be the place where people are staying, but would be a place that people could go to get warm during the day or during the night in these spaces. And then on those extreme cold weather nights, we might look to try to find other places for people to go indoors if they're open to that option. But we would be working with that group of people in that organized way, and that would make all of that so much more possible than it is right now.
I want to say thank you to everybody who has tuned in, and I want to let you know something. I appreciate the opportunity to engage
just a minute.
with you
This is
all
almost over.
on this important issue. This is not just a District 9 dynamic. This is a citywide issue.
It's a meeting.
And if we believe that we are going to just have the burden in one area and have one area figure it out because they've got, resources as it relates to shelters and as it relates to Stout Street Clinic and as it relates to some of the services that our unhoused neighbors actually utilize, and I think we're missing the point. This is a growing problem. It's a growing problem everywhere. What I would like to share with everyone in leaving is this. This issue did not just begin. And so if you believe you haven't been outreached to, many of us have been looking at this issue going all the way back to the Triangle, going all the way back to when Larimer was filled with pawn shops and et cetera. And just because some individuals may have just shown up and feel as though they haven't been talked to, haven't been reached, every time you pass an unhoused neighbor, you are being outreached to. Every time you pass what you call a camp, every time you have to cross over on the sidewalk and decide whether you're going to go this way because you don't want to see that, or you've got to call, or you've got to make, you are being outreached to. And so I appreciate everybody who's working on this issue. I appreciate District 9 and all of the other districts that are saying, look, here's my plan, here's our effort, here's our contribution. But for those of you who are saying this isn't my problem, that's what the problem by and large may be. Let's all come together, let's work together, set aside our differences so that we can really address one of the most pressing issues of the time, and that's looking out for those who could use our help the most. Thank you all. Again, as Dr. Lisa Calderon said, this is a meeting that took place because the formal meeting that was planned by the mayor was canceled. That's why you're having this conversation today. So wherever you're getting your information, however you're getting outreach to, just plug into that and hopefully it will converge us all into one single place. Thank you all. Have a great evening. And this is not the beginning, and it's not the end. It's certainly not the beginning, but wherever you get on this train, welcome aboard. Doo, doo.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
I'm going to go ahead and let everyone sign off. And again, we are still on Facebook. I'm looking at some of these comments. I'm hoping that, someone from the councilwoman's office is copied and pasted some of the comments in the question and answer session. I think the question and answers, even though if we didn't say your question specifically, it was answered by one of the panelists in one way, shape, or form. If it was not Councilwoman Candy C. DeBaca is not hard to reach. And this is not your only opportunity to engage. So everyone have a great night. We appreciate you. And as we say, I'm signing off. Good night.
Good night.